the dorm room that kept getting warmer every night. The first night she noticed it, the heat felt like a mistake rather than a message. Early September in Ohio, a Sunday that leaned into Monday, the kind of campus night when cicadas buzz like old streetlights and the dorm's brick walls hold the afternoon sun just long enough to be nostalgic. Isolde Marin unrolled a thrifted rug that smelled faintly of cedar, set two plants on the windowsill like green punctuation, and lay back on the narrow bed under the hum of a fan that tried hard and failed. Sutter Hall, room 412, fourth floor, end of the hall. The radiator beneath the window ticked its polite little ticks. Her phone read 78 inside, while the weather app swore 68 outside. Before we begin, tell me, where are you listening from and what time is it there? The year was 2018. Move-in had been a week of book stacks, cardboard cuts, and names learned in bursts that evaporated by dinner. Isolde's major was urban studies with a minor in printmaking because maps and ink made sense even when people did not. Her roommate, a sophomore transfer named Mairead Klein, arrived with a battered cello case and the posture of someone who had done 3 summers of lifeguarding and was still listening for whistles. Their RA, Bram Delaney, wore a lanyard like a badge and kindness like a habit. The floor smelled like laundry pods and slice and bake cookies. The building smelled like every Midwestern dorm built in the 1970s, a blend of cinder block, old varnish, and the ghost of burnt popcorn. That first night, Isolde pushed the window up 2 inches. The sash stuck, then relented with a groan that sounded like the word careful. She fell asleep to a parking lot lullaby and woke at 2:19 with her neck damp. The fan had not changed. The room had. The little thermometer clipped to her backpack strap said 81. She turned the fan higher. The blades shouted their small capacity. She kicked the blanket down and slept again like a person auditioning for rest. Monday, the heat drifted earlier, 10:47. A wave across her ankles first, then knees, then a slow embrace that felt like a crowded bus in July. She checked the radiator. Cold metal. She put her palm on the cinder block, on the window glass, on the closet door. Nothing from those shapes admitted guilt. Mairead returned from orchestra and set the cello gently on the desk chair. She stood still, chin tilted, the way musicians listen to rooms. "Do you feel that?" she asked. "It keeps getting warmer after midnight," Isolde said. "The building probably overcorrects, day cools down, system lags, night gets weird." Mairead nodded. "I fell asleep during rehearsal last winter in a practice room. Woke drenched. Found out the steam had backfed into a silent radiator. You could hear it in the walls if you pressed your ear." They both pressed their ears to the dorm wall. The cinder block offered a polite shush, the way libraries used to. No steam, no hiss, just the slow drum of a building's heart. By Wednesday, the room was a decision the night kept making. 83 by 1 a.m., 85 by 3. Isolde checked the hallway, cool enough to be a relief. She checked the stairwell, cooler still. In the common room, a girl wearing a sweatshirt that said "Ecology means everything" had her feet tucked under her and a textbook open like a tent. She looked up. "Your floor hot too." "Only ours," Isolde said. "Or only me. Or only when I try to sleep." They laughed because college teaches you to treat weirdness like weather. You comment, you adapt, you set one more fan on the windowsill and call it a life. Thursday brought a storm that argued with the city for hours. A late summer brawl of heat and lightning. The power hiccuped and then recovered. The building hummed. At 2 a.m., the room hung heavy. Isolde slid out of bed, walked to the window, and pressed her forehead to the screen, as if the night owed her an apology. Far below, a maintenance cart whispered along the service road. She saw the driver's hat and his careful hands. She did not see the face. She told herself the heat felt personal only because you cannot argue with a building and win. By Saturday, the temperature games had found a schedule. 9:58, a nudge. 11:30, a hand on the small of the back. 1:12, the sensation of standing too close to an open oven. Isolde began to time her showers like a boxer timing breath. She tried sleeping on the cool tile of the little bathroom. She tried damp cloths on wrists and ankles. She tried a sliver of ice in a hand towel held to her throat. She tried pretending it was fine. She told no one at home because her mother would only worry and send articles about heat stroke and her father would suggest a hardware store trip that distance made irrelevant. Sunday night, Mairead woke first. She swung her legs over the side of the bed, said a word that sounded like, "What is this?" and went to the window. The sash had dropped the last inch by itself at some point in the night, closing with that old house suction that makes a soft kiss. She lifted it again, hot air breathed in, not outdoor hot. Not the honest humidity of a Midwest night, different, like the air that escapes when you open a dryer in a laundromat and forget to step back. "We call maintenance in the morning," Mairead said. "We tell them we have an invisible sauna. We use likable voices and the phrase safety concern." Monday morning, Bram came with a clipboard and his likable voice. He listened earnestly, took the temperature with a cheap tool that blinked numbers nobody trusted, wrote down 86, and then underlined it as if underlining were a wrench. He called facilities. They promised someone by afternoon. The someone arrived at 4:19, late enough to be human, early enough to look like hope. His name patch read Gentry. He was the kind of person who stands in a room like it has a puzzle only he can solve and then smiles when the puzzle turns out to be harder. He checked the radiator, the thermostat no one had noticed in the corner with its tiny slider, the vent slits high near the ceiling that made the room look like it could breathe if it wanted to. "Steam off," he said. "Air handler off. You got a ghost heater." He grinned to make sure they understood he meant the phrase and not the ghost. But he knocked on the radiator anyway, knuckles to iron, the way some people knock on wood when they do not believe in luck and practice it just in case. He opened the closet and frowned. "Do you mind?" he asked, and shifted their shoes to one side. Behind the shoe rack, a square of plywood patched a hole in the wall. Screws, paint over paint. He crouched, fit a screwdriver into a head, and worked it loose. When the panel came away, a breath of air came with it. Warm, the kind of warm air that has been waiting its turn. "Old Chase," he said. "Big one. They used to run steam risers along these shafts in the 70s. Maybe a repair, maybe somebody capped something and forgot to ask the night to forgive them." He put his hand into the dark space and paused. He was not afraid. He was listening. Hear that. They leaned closer. At first, only quiet, then a small sound. Not a hiss, not a vapor whisper. A tick. Regular, patient. Like a metronome a long room away. Gentry nodded. "Thermal something. Or a tenant below you added a pet space heater that thinks it owns the building. I'll trace the chase. I'll talk to the engineers." He put the panel back gently and made a note on his worksheet with a pencil that had been sharpened to the earnest point of a person who still respects graphite. "I will try to fix the physics. In the meantime, get a bigger fan." He winked to soften the fact that bigger fans often just make bigger noise. They bought another fan anyway. They bought clips to hold the window higher. They bought ice in the deli and wrapped it in a towel like a patient. Still, Knight insisted. Isolde began keeping a notebook. It was a habit from a summer job shelving returns. Titles, times, temperatures. Notes that sounded like weather reports written by a poet with a bad sense of humor. The dorm ate the cool at 1:18. The bed felt like a cast iron pan that had forgotten it was retired. I dreamed of a field on fire with no flame. She started staying up with the heat to see if it would reveal its reason. She did readings in the hall where the air felt borderline normal. She ate popsicles and pretended it was study fuel. She took walks at 2 and saw the campus under its other mask. A place of slow bikes and glowing vending machines, and a custodian humming while polishing a floor into a lake. Once she saw Gentry in the stairwell, descending from 5 with a coil of flexible duct over his shoulder like a silver python that had agreed to be helpful. He nodded and lifted one hand without letting the duct slip. "Sleep," he said in the tone of a wish. By the 3rd week, a rumor floated into their floor group chat. Sutter Hall used to be a summer dorm for high school programs and band camps. The heat was leftover rehearsal energy. Someone else wrote that an electrical fire in 1979 had bruised the 4th floor and the building was still shy about it. A person named Quillen in 409 posted a link to an archive student newspaper with a grainy photo of firefighters carrying a hose through a stairwell that looked exactly like theirs. Headline: "Minor fire, major evacuation. No injuries, cause unknown." Mairead, who believed in research the way some people believe in saint candles, went to the library's basement where old newsprint lives. She returned with photocopies that smelled faintly of toner and dust. The story was sparse. Smoke at 3:03, alarms, students in bathrobes on the lawn, the heat source somewhere inside a wall where a maintenance chase ran, repairs by October, reopening with new paint and the same old radiators. She spread the pages on the desk like cards. There, she said softly, pointing to a little box at the margin. Letter to the editor. Student writes that the heat on 4 was getting worse each night before the fire. RA told them to open windows and hydrate. Facilities said everything within normal range. The days were normal. The nights turned the rooms into ovens. Isolde looked from the paper to the cinder block. Sometimes a run of text looks like a hallway and you want to walk down it with a flashlight. She hit the building's history page on the university site. Donors. Dedications. A black and white photo of a ribbon. Nothing about the night warmth that arrived like someone else's breath. At 1:27, the room grew heavy again. As if their research had rung a bell the building had been waiting to hear. The fan jammed the window open, but the heat came anyway. The little thermometer blinked 88 and then surrendered to the idea that numbers, like sleep, sometimes lose track of themselves. Isolde slept badly and woke with a headache that tasted like pennies. On her desk, the notebook sat open to an entry she did not remember writing. The letters were tidy, her handwriting when she tried to look like someone else. She read the line twice, then 3 times. It said, "Open the panel," and the period at the end looked like a door. She waited until afternoon. Gentry had promised to come back sometime, and sometime often arrives when a person steps away for 5 minutes. At 4 o'clock, with the building's light turned down to that late summer amber, she moved the shoe rack again and unscrewed the panel. The dark behind it was not night, exactly. More like the idea of a hallway after the last person has left and turned the lights off out of habit. She lifted her phone flashlight and aimed it into the chase. Dust motes performed private theater. A vertical shaft, maybe 2 feet across, ran up and down like a secret elevator. Patches where pipes had once been. Scars where brackets had caught things. And there, almost directly under the bottom edge of the opening, a flat ledge of old wood with something resting on it. Isolde reached in with care as if the dark could be brittle. Her fingers found the object's corner. Cardboard. The top felt soft, the way paper does when it has been damp and then forced to pretend it never was. She drew it out. A small box that had once been white and now had become a kind of museum beige. On the lid, written in a hand that pressed too light, a word like a name, Juniper. She set the box on the rug and did not open it. She waited, and the waiting gave her permission to continue. Inside, a stack of index cards tied with string, a folded note, a key on a blue ribbon, narrow as a promise. The note began with, "Dear whoever found this," and continued with the kind of sentences people write when they have been waiting to tell something to a person who will understand. The year at the top of the page read 1979. The signature at the bottom read, "Juniper Vale, Room 4, 16, Sutter Hall." The handwriting leaned to the right, steady as a person who prefers walking to running. "I do not know if I will be believed," it said. "So I am writing this as plainly as I can. Our room is getting warmer each night. The thermometer in our snake plant reads 87 at 3 in the morning. Nobody believes a snake plant. My roommate thinks I am being dramatic. I asked the RA. He said it is just late summer in Ohio. It is not. The heat comes after midnight. It leaves at dawn. The radiator is cold. The vent does not blow. The closet smells like hot iron. I hear ticking in the wall. We are on 4. If you are reading this, maybe you have it too." Isolde felt her own breath echo back from the paragraph. She looked up at the closet door, then at the open chase, as if the words might have leaked. Juniper's note went on, "I work at the cafeteria breakfast shift. I am awake when others are asleep. The heat is a person to me now. It arrives at a time, it stays, it goes. I tried to leave the window open and the sash slid down. I propped it with a book, the book fell, then the window closed by itself. I am not saying a ghost. I am saying something else has a habit here. In case this is useful to you, I am also leaving these. Inside the library's bound journals, someone wrote about a fire on this floor long ago, and then someone else took the page out. I copied what I could before they did. The key is to a storage cabinet in the basement of this building. There are boxes there the staff say are theirs. The key works for the green cabinet that has a dent like a fist. I did not take anything because I got scared. Maybe you will not be. If no one else believes you, I do. I believe you enough to hide this where the building keeps its secrets. If I am wrong, throw this away. If I am right, find what the staff do not talk about. Do not forget to sleep. That is where your spine remembers its job. Mairead came in from rehearsal and stopped when she saw the open panel, the box, the pages laid like a small altar. She sank to the floor and read with both hands pressed flat against the rug as if to steady the words. We have to find the cabinet, she said, voice quiet like church. We have to ask Bram to not ask questions. Bram did ask questions because that is also the RA's job. When he saw the note and the box and the panel, he bent his head. He was not a superstitious person, only a person who had worked 3 summers as a camp counselor and learned that buildings hold mood the way lakes hold wind. I can get you into the basement, he said. I will walk away from the door and hum loudly so that if anyone asks me what I was doing, I can say I was humming. You will be fast. The basement under Sutter was everything a basement should be. Cool as forgiveness, damp as a memory kept by concrete. The hall shone a soft yellow that made everything look like a faded photograph. Green cabinets lined one wall. The third from the end had a dent like a fist. The key ribbon was blue. The lock turned. Inside, cardboard boxes labeled with dates and short phrases. Stack of work orders, Steam archive, fire log, staff do not remove. The handwriting on the labels was neat and stern. Mairead reached up and slid one down. The bottom sagged ominously. They set it on the floor. Inside, manila folders swollen with damp and years. Isolde opened one and pulled a sheet carefully so it would not split. Work order, Sutter 4. Room 416. Unusual heat after midnight. Radiator cold. Closet warm. Check chase, check riser. She set it aside and pulled another. Work order, Sutter 4. Room 412. Student reports late heat, not present daytime. Housekeeping notes window sash malfunctioning. Recommend maintenance weld stop. Isolde looked up. Weld stop. She imagined a person 40 years earlier thinking a sliding sash a nuisance and telling someone to make it tame. Another folder. Fire log, September. Smell of hot iron. Call at 3-3. Response within 3 minutes. Source uncertain. Damage limited to inside of chase between 412 and 416. Cause undetermined. Recommendation: cap steam riser permanently at basement and roof. Service ticket created. The paper clipped to the recommendation was a receipt for parts and a penciled note reading, done. A second note added another sentence in a different hand. Night crew reports residual heat persists. Monitor. Mairead pressed her palm over her own heart. This is the story of every building that tries to forget. The parts get fixed, the habit stays. They took photos with their phones like archivists on a deadline. They replaced the folders in the box with the care of people dressing a child who was finally asleep. They locked the cabinet. Bram hummed. The hallway air kept its cool. Back upstairs, they sat with the panel open and the note on the rug, and the cooling afternoon creeping through the window like a kind visitor. Isolde's notebook waited with its white page. She wrote, Juniper, thank you. She did not know where to put the sentence, so she put it on the first line under the date so it would be the thing the day had to carry. At 1:28, the heat returned. It did not surge. It arrived politely, like a person who has been taught to knock. Isolde sat on the floor beside the open chase and placed her hand just inside without touching any side. The air felt warmer than the room, as if the chase were a throat exhaling a breath it had saved. What do you want? She said aloud, not because she thought the building would answer, but because sometimes the voice knows which door truth stands behind. The tick came again, regular, small. Isolde counted between ticks. 3 seconds, 3 seconds, 3 seconds. The rhythm made a shape in her mind, not a clock, a valve. A thing that opens and then holds. A thing that believes in intervals. She looked at the radiator. At the elbow joint where the old pipe met the shutoff wheel, a tiny telltale stain had crept along the seam, brown and precise. She leaned closer. Warm, not hot. Warm like a wrist. Gentry returned the next day with a partner whose name patch read Tova. They listened, as technicians do when the room is allowed to make its case. Isolde showed them the cabinet photos. Tova's lips kept a straight line while her eyebrows confessed their feelings. They pulled the panel and shone better light. They found the old riser, capped, cool. They found a newer run of conduit laid up the side at some later date, carrying wires, not heat. They found insulation collapsed onto itself like old cake. They found nothing that pointed to a flame or a hiss. Tova ran a thermal camera along the cinder block. The screen glowed in false color. A vertical stripe warmer than its neighbors lay behind the closet and the head of the bed. Not red, not danger, yellow shading into orange. Residual, Gentry said, could be heat migrating from a lower source, could be a hot water loop bringing showers to the floor below with more enthusiasm than planned. But the loop below doesn't run at 3 in the morning, Tova said. She had the nap schedule of the building memorized. She pointed to the thermal stripe. This is a habit. They scheduled a shutdown for the following night, midnight to 4. The building would sigh and then sleep while they opened valves and listened for the kind of silence that tells the truth. Bram knocked on doors and posted signs. The girls in Ecology Means Everything, Sweats, groaned about showers and then agreed. The 4th floor exhaled in a collective okay. At 12:12, the pump slowed. The fan in 412 made its small, brave wind. The window held at 3 inches with 2 clips like a pair of loyal hands. At 1:27, the room still warmed. Not as high, not as fast, but enough to say, I am here. Isolde sat on the rug and pressed her shoulder to the closet wall. She closed her eyes so hearing could be her only job. She heard the tick. She heard Myreed's breath even. She heard, outside, a late skateboard roll between classes like a drum. And she heard, very faint and not from the chase at all, a tone. Not a pipe, not a fan, not foreseeable. A note, caught and held. Then gone. She opened her eyes. Mairead was looking at her with a musician's gaze. You heard it too. What is it? Isolde asked. A harmonic. The kind you get when a sympathetic thing vibrates because its friend is nearby. She touched the cello case. Instruments do it, rooms do it, bodies do it when they are convinced. She stood, walked to the bookshelf, lifted a glass of water, and set it on the radiator. The surface quivered. A ripple. A second one. The pattern of the tick. Mairead tuned by memory and sang a single, low pitch, almost under her breath. A hum that could have been mistaken for a thought. The glass shivered. The tick in the wall danced out of step, then found her beat, then stilled as if listening, then returned. What if, she said quietly, all this is sound pretending to be heat? Isolde did not laugh. She had learned the month prior that grief can pretend to be a quiz grade and hunger can pretend to be impatience. Why not sound pretending to be heat? She ran her palm along the cinder block, then placed it flat and left it. A warmth answered. The next day was October 1st. Campus wore flannel and pretended it had always loved cinnamon. Facilities sent an email with the subject line Steam Update that promised further investigation and patience. The 4th floor shared a thread of remedies and rituals. Bowls of ice, mist bottles, wet socks trick, floor naps. No one suggested sage. Someone suggested prayer with a grin that did not deny its usefulness. That night, the heat arrived like a smaller animal. 81, 82, a steady hold at 83. Manageable if you learned how. Isolde placed the glass on the radiator again, turned off the fans, and waited for quiet to settle where it belongs. Mairead sang once, twice, and stopped. The glass's ripples slowed. The tick shifted to the far side of the closet. A draft found her ankles like a cat checking for attention. The room listened back. They made it through October with methods that would have looked ridiculous out of context and were ordinary inside it. They slept with wet towels folded like scarves. They studied in the hall and accepted that their room had been reclassified as a place you prepared to enter rather than a place you lived. They kept the panel off. They learned to say thank you to cool mornings and to say aloud the promise to return before night put its hand on the doorknob. One evening, after a storm blew leaves against the window like letters trying to enter, Bram knocked and leaned in. "Facilities found something," he said. "You want to come see?" The invitation sounded like a friend offering to show you where a magic trick hides its thread. In the basement, Tova stood beside the building's old heart, piping like veins, valves like knuckles, tags tied with string, naming parts from an era that believed names mattered. She pointed to a run that disappeared into the wall beneath, where 412 would stand above them. Here, a capped branch, not steam, an old electrical conduit bypassed years ago. It sits next to a hot water loop. When the loop runs heavy during evening showers, it warms the conduit and then the chase. The chase carries that warmth upward. At night, when the loop cycles to keep the building from feeling abandoned, the warmth lingers. The panel in your closet became the mouth of it. A small chimney with no smoke. Gentry tapped the conduit with his knuckle. You could call it physics, you could also call it habit. Either is the right answer. They installed insulation around the conduit. They added an air brake in the chase so warmth would stop treating the wall like a ladder. They replaced the window's stiff cords so the sash would consent to stay where a human asked it to stay. They promised it would help. They did not promise everything. It helped. The nights cooled to numbers that looked like decimals instead of pronouncements. 77. 76 when the wind took an interest. Isolde slept without wet towels. She still woke at 1:27 once, for no reason except the body's loyalty to former alarms. She lay there and listened. The room made its old house noises. Outside, snow rehearsed far away and then gave up. She fell asleep, mouthing the word juniper the way a person mouths the name of a bus stop, to remember where to get off next time. November brought a letter. Real paper, wiggle of ink, the return address, for a dorm across campus, Reed Hall. Inside, 2 sentences in a tidy hand. "I found your note in the basement box when Bram fetched more tape for door decorations. My aunt's name was Juniper Vale. She lived in Sutter in 1979. I have a photo of her in front of a radiator holding a cup of tea and laughing like the tea was a joke. Thank you for believing her. Signed, Quillen Vale, room 305. Isolde wrote back. She wrote about the cabinet and the boxes and the way the building had tried to forget. Quillen wrote again with a copy of the photo. Juniper looked like someone who would hide a note and trust the future. Hair gathered in a bandana, eyes practicing mischief. The radiator behind her, upright as a soldier that had decided to sit. Finals arrived like weather that had been announced for weeks and still surprised everyone. Mairead spent long hours in the practice rooms, bow rising and falling like a small boat riding out a swell. Isolde finished a printmaking project of 14 little maps of Sutter Hall. She gave the stairwells names. She drew the 4th floor twice, once by day, once by night. She printed in blue and rust. She added a tiny red dot where their closet panel sat like a secret door. She titled the piece, Heat Rises, Then Cool Heads. On the last night before winter break, they propped the door open and played a playlist of songs that sounded like leaving without saying goodbye. Their neighbors drifted in. Cups of cocoa. A plate of cookies that looked store-bought and tasted like grief in the shape of sugar. Someone told a story about a chessboard left in a laundry room that always had one piece moved between midnight and dawn. Someone else told a story about a campus fountain that ran warm all winter like a stubborn rumor. They laughed easily because relief had come. Before midnight, Bram stood in the doorway with his clipboard and a tired smile and said, "Thank you for not setting anything on fire this semester," which is a low bar that feels high after October. Isolde slept early and woke with the feeling of being watched in a kind way. She rolled over and looked at the open panel. The chase breathed a soft, neutral air. She whispered the habit of her thanks the way some people say grace. For the cool, for the note, for the way buildings hold hands with the people who listen. In January, when the term began again and the air cut like paper, the room behaved. The radiator learned its job when asked. The night stopped bringing heat like a dare. The panel stayed off anyway. They left it open not because they liked the view of a dark shaft, but because some doors, once discovered, should not be forced to forget they can open. One night in late February, when snow made a tidy line along the windowsill and the hall smelled like wool and wet boots, Mairead tuned and held a low note the way a person can hold a breath when they want the person across from them to finish their thought. The glass on the radiator did not ripple, the tick did not come. She let the note go, she smiled. Habit broken, she said, and then added, or perhaps trained. Spring came in fits of joy and apology. Sutter Hall turned quiet, then loud, then quiet again. Finals chalked the sidewalks with equations and wishes. On the last afternoon before move-out, Gentry and Tova came by with a work order that did not need signatures. "We are capping the chase permanently," Tova said. "Not the kind of permanent that forgets. The kind that leaves a note for the next person." Gentry nodded at the open panel. "Leave it if you want, we're not offended." He tapped the cinder block once with his knuckle and said, "Thanks for telling us. We need buildings to snitch on us. Otherwise, we fix the wrong things." They closed their boxes. They took the plants off the sill. They rolled the rug into a new shape. Bram signed their checkout forms with a flourish. In the hall, Isolde taped one last paper to the wall at eye level between 412 and 416. Not a manifesto, not a myth, a map. She had printed 2 copies. The little red dot, the words, "If your room gets warmer every night, you are not dramatic and you are not alone." The panel in the closet is held by 4 screws. Please listen for the tick. Please go to the basement cabinet with the green dent. And please, sleep. Your spine remembers its job when you do. She signed it tiny, just initials, because the story did not belong to her alone. Years later, when she would sleep in cities with windows that sealed shut and air that arrived by command, she would sometimes wake at 1:27 and rest her palm against the wall. Habit. Memory. A check-in with the building around her. She would feel the honest cool of drywall. She would hear the thrum of someone's TV 3 floors down, or a neighbor's late laugh, and think, heat pretended to be sound, then sound pretended to be heat, and we learned to name what was ours to name. If you are listening to this, and your room keeps getting warmer every night, put your hand on the wall. Count between the ticks if you hear them. Call the person with the name Patch and the quiet eyes. Ask them to look for the habit behind the system. And if you find a note in a chase, write your own, then leave the panel open long enough for the room to remember it can breathe. The night will arrive either way. It is better when it finds you ready, with a glass of water on the radiator and a song in your pocket that knows how to lay its hand gently on the room and say, "We hear you, we're staying. We're going to keep you company until morning cools the world back into something we can bear." He followed the whistling into the cornfield. He told himself it was wind in the stalks, nothing more. But the sound had shape, and it carried a tune the way a bottle carries a ship. It rose up from the edge of the north field just before midnight, thin and certain, 3 notes first, then a run, then a pause, that felt like a person making room for breath. The night in Story County, Iowa, was the kind that makes a kitchen window into a mirror. He stood with one hand on the sill, the other around a chipped mug, and the whistling kept at it, unafraid to be heard. Before we begin, tell me where are you listening from and what time is it there? This was late September 2015. The day had been warm, sky rinsed clean after a brief storm, gravel roads drying into their usual rattle. The farm sat a mile and a half south of Nevada, east of the Skunk River, where it hooks like a lazy elbow. The corn had gone that heavy, dull gold that means the grain is ready and the husks are sick of holding on. In the house, the bedside clock down the hall said 11:52. On the porch, a moth bumped the bulb, reconsidered, bumped again. Merritt Dow listened and felt his scalp move, the way skin does when a memory gets up and looks at you. He had heard whistling most of his life, but not like this. His father had been a whistler when he repaired the sickle bar, when he checked the tension on the auger belts. His grandfather, too, walking the rows with a plug of tobacco and a tune older than the tractor. Merritt could place a tune by county if you gave him a night and a jar of iced tea. This one, though it didn't belong to any porch or station wagon, it had the small brightness of a fairground and the old soul of a hymn, mixed wrong on purpose and still somehow right. He set the mug down, pulled on his boots without bothering with the laces, and stepped into the porch light. The whistling came again, 3 notes that stepped down like someone walking off a train. He clicked off the switch. The yard went honest. The gravel drive was a gray river. The corn made its tinny rain sound whenever the breeze remembered its job. To the north, the trees along the fence line held their breath. Merritt had a habit of heading toward curiosity as if it were a calf out past the fence that needed fetching. He took the flashlight from the hook, the heavy kind with a rubber grip, and checked the batteries the way a person checks their pulse. He told himself this was neighbor trouble, or a kid from town testing bravery on a Friday dare. He told himself this was what the night does to grown men when sleep holds them by the elbow and then lets go. He told Dinah, the old collie, to stay. She licked once, turned in a tight circle on the porch rug, and stayed. He crossed the yard, past the big maple that had survived lightning by pretending it hadn't happened, and stepped onto the headland by the north field. The first road took him in like a store's door chime. The stalks were tall and dry, leaves bent into knives. The ground was soft from last week's rain and held his boot prints as if for reference. He waited for the whistling. It came from farther in now, or the rose had changed the way sound bends when it's forced to choose a path. He chose a path. He took row 18, the one that ran with the slight slope and the way water teaches roots to drink. His father had run the planter careful this spring, GPS straight when the signal behaved, by eye when it didn't. Row 18 should have held like a rail, the stalks pressed against his sleeves. The flashlight beam drew clean wood into the dark leaves, bleaching white, silk like old hair, dirt a puzzle of last year's husks, and this year's pennies of mud. The whistling stopped. He stood still. His breath sounded like someone else's in the mask of leaves. He tasted dust. He listened until listening felt like a rope he had to keep from dropping. Farther north, down toward the low spot by the drainage tile, it started again, only louder, as if the person had turned their head and decided the audience was worth the effort. Merritt moved. 3 rows over, the tram line cut across, a packed strip where the sprayer had gone in June. He took it. The corn arched overhead, leaves flicking his ears. Spiders had slung long theories between stalks. He broke them and apologized in his head. He had walked this ground every day for months, and the ground had said yes like a friend. Tonight, it felt like a cousin, a person who loves you without being sure what to do with you. He reached the low spot. The field dipped and turned its face toward the tile that ran down to the ditch. The air was cooler here, lined with the smell of black earth that keeps secrets for centuries, because that's what it was paid to do. The whistling had gone softer. A trill rose up like someone trying to make light of an apology. Merritt swept the flashlight sideways. The beam caught the blue reflection of something small and glassy. He crouched. A marble. Blue, with a pale ribbon curled inside, half under a leaf. He touched it with one finger and felt the way glass feels when it learned patience waiting inside a pocket for its chance. He stood, and the beam hit another, green this time, lodged at the foot of a stalk. He put them both in his shirt pocket without thinking which pocket meant past and which meant present. "Hello," he said. The field appreciated the effort, if the small answering hush meant anything. He wasn't the kind of man who called out names into a place that did not have names to call back. He was the kind of man who waited and then took one more step, the way you do with cattle that have decided the gate is optional. He took one more step. The ground had a memory. His boots sank an inch, then 2. He pulled up. The mud let go with a sound like a low laugh. The beam found a scuff in the soil that wasn't his. It had rained the day before, a polite rain that brightened the world and left. Tracks should be fresh. This mark had a sharpness to it he didn't like. He aimed the light again. The scuff came to a point. Not deer, not raccoon. A toe of a boot slid sideways and corrected because the body above that boot had decided to remain upright. The field held that story and did not mind telling it. The whistling kept on. It moved east. Merritt moved too, allowing the rows to push him into the old waterway nobody planted because it cost more to argue with a ditch than to go around. He hit the bank and paused. The sound was close enough now to feel the mouth that made it. The slight wet at the end of notes, the breath through teeth. Above the ditch, on the fence line, a scarecrow leaned into the moon like he had been invited. Merritt had dressed him in a flannel shirt in July to keep the birds from laughing outright. Now the shirt's checks looked like an argument. The hat had blown off sometime in August. The stake had a twist in it the way wood does when it was alive and insists on a personality after. The scarecrow whistled. Merritt's body did not move in the way of cartoon men. He did not jump. He did not fling the light so hard the beam went to the stars. He stood, the way a person stands when what he sees insists on being nothing but what it is. He put the light on the scarecrow's painted mouth. The paint was flaked, the smile wrong on purpose. His father's old gloves were nailed to the crosspiece, fingers bent into permanent work. The straw at the neck had learned the shape of wind and refused to unlearn it. The tune came again from behind the scarecrow, clipped by fence wire and field. He played the beam along the fence. This line had been his grandfather's. His father had repaired it across 3 winters, one staple at a time, using a hammer that had bent 100 nails and 100 more. Tonight, a single strand lay loose between posts, a neat cut at shin height made by someone who liked clean work. Beyond the fence, the other place. Neighbors in the country are closer than people in town and farther away. The acreage to the east had belonged to the Kesslers once, then to the bank, then to a man who installed irrigation pivots with a speed that made the county whisper. Then it's Saturday. The pivot circle kept a gargoyle symmetry in the daylight and turned to bones at night. The whistling came from inside that circle, not far, an invitation or a dare. Merritt climbed the fence by habit and dropped into the tall, ragged grass beyond. His flashlight skipped over metal. The pivot tower rose where the corn had been cut early for silage. A ladder led up to a catwalk that had not been used since a summer of drought and cheap diesel. The sky put someone else's stars over everything. Under the ladder sat a cooler the color of a toy, lid askew, ice melted into a cold thought. 2 bottles lay on their sides. The labels had lost interest in staying on. He touched one. The glass was warm, warmer than the air deserved. He called out again, a different word this time. Friend. The whistling answered with the same run of notes. He followed the sound around the base of the pivot. His light found Cobb's nod down to the spindle by raccoons with principle. He found a folding chair with only 3 of its 4 screws willing. He found a playing card gone into the dirt, face down forever. He did not find a person. The corn from the other side rustled, a polite cough. He turned. A taller shadow leaned out from where 2 rows had been pushed apart. The flashlight found denim, boots. The hem of a coat cut square. A hand. The skin had the tint of rural men, year-round, sun-washed, wind-scoured. The fingers were long and still. The hand did not wave. Evening, Merritt said. He stepped closer. The shadow stepped back. The hand slid into the rows, as if hiding from a photograph. The whistling receded down an aisle of stalks, clean and straight as a hallway. He went after it. Later, he would say he never chose to follow, and he would not count that as a lie. The rows insisted. The sound invited. The night did what it always does when a person leaves a safe light and enters a place built to fit bodies only one at a time. It made a mouth and decided whether to swallow or to speak. The field spoke directions in leaves. He followed until the path tried to teach him regret, and his feet refused to be taught. At the heart of the pivot circle, the ground sank another foot. He stumbled once, caught himself against a stalk so dry it cut his palm in a clean straight line. He swore, quietly, with vowels only. The whistling had slowed. It drew out a single note and hung it in the air as if asking him to name it. He named it Unkind. He turned off the flashlight. Dark held him like water does when you slide under and open your eyes. The field went black, then not. The sky had its thin light, the stars arranged their patient omissions. The rows were no longer alleyways, exactly. They were sentences. A breeze moved through and added commas. He stepped forward into a word, then another. The whistling stopped. He waited. He could hear the pivot tower creak, a metal thought adjusting. A truck moved way off on County 18, 3 miles at least. Tires with thick voices, a man's radio too loud in the cab because the night drives its price down for everyone. He waited until the waiting was its own problem. He reached for the flashlight, the beam hit denim again. Close. A shoulder. He yanked the light up and met a face. It was not a face he knew from today. It might have been a face from a photograph under glass at the county fair, past names, eyes poured in. The hat was the wrong cut for now and the right cut for when hats were more than hats. The eyes adjusted to light with the slow patience of a barn cat in a doorway. The mouth held a shape that wasn't a smile and wasn't what comes later. The cheeks were hollowed in, the way working men's cheeks sag when they finally let the day have them. Don't, the man said, not loud. He lifted one finger the way a teacher does when she'd rather not get stern. Don't shine. Merritt lowered the beam to the man's chest. The denim had a tag that read, Kessler in faded thread, as if a mother had stitched it when mud was the usual weather. The man nodded, brief. He put 2 fingers to his mouth and whistled the run again. The notes slid under the leaves and came back altered by straw and distance. Had to see if you'd come, the man said. He did not offer his name. He did not ask Merritt's. The field did the introductions it believed in. The man tipped his chin toward the north, where the ditch had cut a new curve 2 springs ago, and nobody called the county because sometimes you let water take responsibility for its own choices. Come on, then. They went up Row, across the tram line, down again. Merritt kept the light aimed at boots and dirt the way you aim swear words when children are sleeping in the next room. The man's hands brushed the tassels as he went, leaving no sound. The field learned him and forgot Merritt in the same breath. They crossed into the neighbor's back 40, and the soil changed, darker and more confident. The rows had more to say here. The whistling would come and go like a small animal, checking the air and disliking it. The man stopped at a patch where the stalks had been storm-bent and then righted themselves out of pride. He crouched, hand out, palm down, on top of a flat stone that had no business on this ground. The stone was square. It held an iron ring in one corner. He tapped it. The sound returned like a jar lid. Used to be a storm door, he said. For the root cellar. They built the house up there. He flicked his eyes toward where the stars thinned and the silhouette of a ruined chimney picked its teeth on the horizon. Tornado took it in '54, you know that. Merritt nodded. He had heard the story. The county leaned on that year. It changed the way people believe in roofs. 3 days after, the man said, setting his palm to the stone like a pledge, my brother thought he heard whistling here. We believed him because he was the kind of boy who told the truth, even when it meant he had to walk back and fix something. He followed it. Everybody followed it. Men with boots and women with cakes and ropes and tubs and a feeling of the back of their necks being breathed on. We pulled the stone up. We brought lanterns. It goes under like a snake down there. The cellar does. We didn't find anyone. No boy, no breath, just apples rolling because that's what they do when people die. Things keep their job anyway. We closed it back up. Weather put a shoulder on it. And now, he stopped. The whistling came, this time from under their feet. It rose up through the stone like a trick, thin and mean and a little proud, a tune that went square, then wandered off the edge. The iron ring shook against its socket with a burr. Merritt felt the hair along his forearms ask for a vote. Now, the man said, it calls people here when it's time. He put his hand on the ring. I'm tired of it calling people here who are not me. He lifted. It did not rise much. The hinge had rusted itself into religion. The man looked at Merritt, not pleading, exactly, not persuading. He looked like a person offering you the end of a sentence the world has been running too long. Merritt set the flashlight down on its base and got his fingers under the corner. The stone was heavy-hearted, more weight than mass, the kind of weight that comes from being asked to hold back a story. They lifted together. It rose an inch, then 2. It settled on a ridge of broken brick. The smell answered before the dark did. Apples, old and bitter, work that had gone on without supervision. Cold earth that had kept promises by crushing them. A draft moved across Merritt's knuckles. It took his body down a list to be sure each part remembered what stand means. The whistling ran up inside the gap and out. It had volume now. It wished it had a throat. It would have stopped if someone had blessed the night right then and said, go on to sleep. No one blessed the night. Merritt and the man held the stone a second longer, then eased it down onto a stick propped like a tired knee. The gap held. The dark inside threw itself at their eyes and bounced back, patient. They did not aim the flashlight in, the man would not have it, and Merritt knew enough to trust someone who belonged to a place this much. They listened instead. The whistling ran its tune twice, then twice again, and each time the final note sagged, as if asking someone to let it lie. "Why me?" Merritt asked. He wasn't offended by the question. He wanted a reason that could wear a hat. "You were the one who heard it honest," the man said. "You stayed at the edge of your field as long as you could and still came. Some men run because they want a story to tell about themselves. You came because you wanted to know who to go fetch." Merritt shoved down the part of himself that softened at that. He bent, slid his hand into the gap until his fingertips touched the dirt at the lip. It was cool, the way a basement never loses January. He searched by hand, careful for glass, nothing but pebbles and the slow grind of last century's lessons. The whistling faltered. It shortened itself and became 3 notes, those 3 notes he had heard at the kitchen window, the 3 his father had bent into the radio between ballgame innings, the 3 his grandfather had used to call a dog that never needed calling. He withdrew his hand and stood. The man had his head down, listening as if his bones were the receiving equipment. He began to hum, not the tune, but a harmony low and uninsistent. The whistling slowed. The cellar air came up wetter than before, fouled for a second by something like breath, and then clean. The whistling stopped. They waited a full minute, then another. Merritt counted, slow, as if a child in a tent had asked him to promise monsters were on vacation. The ground under the stone was a fact again. The man let his harmony stop, the notes settling like a bird on a line, and then choosing not to stay. He knelt and pulled the stick, and the stone met its ledge with a sound like a chest closing. "Sometimes," the man said into the calm, "it wanted an argument. Sometimes it wanted somebody from back then to say his name and make a promise. It wanted a mother crying on the dirt. It wanted men with rope because rope makes everyone feel helpful. Not tonight. Tonight you came and you didn't carry any of that. You just listened harder than the field wants you to. That's enough." They stood together in the rows until the night got bored with them and went to do what the night does in other places. The pivot sighed and remembered it had bearings, not opinions. The ditch water moved on its way, not fast, not slow, never wrong. A coyote put a sentence into the air and another answered, and both sentences agreed to end where they did. The man tipped the brim of a hat he wasn't wearing and turned back into the corn. His boots made no more sound than a thought that knows its limit. Merritt found his way to his own side of the fence. The cut strand had not healed. Fences need hands. He climbed and dropped into dirt he had paid for with 3.5 decades of rain and frugal Sundays. The scarecrow leaned the same way. His flashlight picked out a nail that had worked proud where a glove met wood. He tapped it back in with the handle, the small sound a hope. On the porch, Dinah lifted her head and thumped her tail twice. He sat on the steps and watched the sky unspool its last thin silk. The clock over the stove in the kitchen read 1:42. A local freight passed through town without asking anyone's opinion. The night had its usual old chair smell. Merritt took the marbles from his pocket and rolled them in his palm. He did not take them in the house. He set them on the porch rail, 2 small moons that decided to belong to weather again. He slept in the chair by the door with the light over the sink left on because he was still old enough to do what his father had done and still young enough to want a reason for it. In the morning, his neighbor from across County 18 pulled into the drive with the casual angle of men who do not use turn signals because everybody already knows where they're going. Otho Vale had the kind of face that had learned to tolerate sunlight and other people's plans. He stepped out, looked toward the north field, then at the porch where the marbles caught the first slant. He paused. "Thought I heard it last night," Otho said, as if they'd been in the same dream and had already agreed on the parts to keep. "I didn't come. I was afraid if I went, I'd bring the wrong thing with me. You go." "I went?" Merritt said. He poured coffee into a cup that had chipped the day his daughter drove away, with her car full and her eyes wider than they had any right to be. He handed the cup down. "There's a stone out there." You know it. Otho nodded. Been there longer than you and me combined. Some things are a door, and some things are the breath you take before you knock. They sat without sitting, Otho leaning on the post, Merritt half on, half off the iron chair that had belonged to his wife's aunt, and squeaked like the first word of gossip. The morning took the night apart and put it away neatly. The field did what fields do after an event. It pretended nothing had happened and invited you to harvest. By 10, the co-op truck rumbled up, the driver wearing the resigned cheer of a man who deals in averages for a living. Merritt walked the headland with him, pointed at moisture readings that lied slightly, agreed to pretend the numbers were written on a blackboard by someone with authority. He did the work. He did it until the work forgave him for wondering what else he might be supposed to do. That evening, he repaired the fence where the strand had been cut. He pulled it tight and stapled it with his grandfather's hammer because you use the tools that know your hands. He hammered in 3 staples and left one in his pocket so the fence would remember there is always one more job and it can't get cocky. He checked the pivot base out of courtesy to the machine. He replaced nothing. He spoke to no one. The sky went red behind weather stacked to the west, Kansas doing its job of sending clouds as if on purpose. For a week, the field behaved. The wind laid down its sheet music neatly. The coupe truck counted out grain like blessings. He slept at the proper times and did not wake to odd hours with the feeling of someone whistling at the edge of his life. The marbles stayed on the porch rail until a grackle knocked one off and it rolled into the peony bed and took up residence there like a kindness. The other slid into the pocket of his jacket and made friends with a nickel and a screw. On the 9th night, just after the 10 o'clock news told its last hurries, he heard the 3 notes again quiet, like acknowledgement, not summons. He walked out to the north edge and stood with his hands in his jacket, listening. The breeze had a bite, the first hard frost would be soon. He unlocked the gate at the lane and left it open for an hour, for no reason at all anyone else would endorse. He closed it again out of habit and walked back slowly, because a person should walk slowly sometimes or the land will feel cheap. He did not go back to the stone unless the sound asked, and it did not. He did, however, leave a small jar on the porch rail next to where the marbles had Saturday. It held nails, the good kind, old, with heads like pennies. Every day when he came home, he put one in his pocket, and every day when he went out after supper, he took one back to the fence line and put it in a coffee can under the scarecrow's torn shirt. Nobody told him to. He liked the weight exchange. He liked that fences need reminding and that the world is not improved by a man who ignores a slack line because his thoughts are more interesting. October reached both hands across the month and pulled. The trucks came and went. The harvest went well enough that he stopped thinking about what could have been if it had rained 4 more afternoons in August. He slept, he woke. The whistling did not return in any way that made him leave his chair. He began to tell himself he had imagined a portion of it, as a man will do when a thing does not ask for money or apologies. Near Halloween, his daughter called from Cedar Rapids, a night shift at the hospital, voice folded with fatigue and the kind of joy that remembers to leave room for the day. He told her about the fence and the harvest and the brakes squeal on the auger wagon that he had decided to live with until January. He did not tell her about the cellar. He would, maybe, when she brought the little boy down for Thanksgiving and they stood by the ditch and talked about frogs like a miracle. He would, maybe, if the field asked them both. In late November, after the last corn went into the bin and the bin talked in its sleep, the county put on its winter color. The field showed ribs, the ditch showed its honest bottom. The wind took one of the scarecrow's gloves, and Merritt did not replace it because some things are beautiful at half done. He walked every line of his ground one afternoon with the sun low and the temperature willing. At the fence, by the pivot circle, under the coffee can where he had been giving the fence its nails, he found a small thing. A train ticket for a child, maybe, not used. Edges scrolled by, damp and patience. The print read, Nevada to Ames, 2 bits. He turned it over. On the back, someone had written 3 notes the way some people know and others never will, little ovals marching up and down a ladder of lines. The ink had migrated slightly into the paper, the way memories do in older heads. He put the ticket in his pocket with the nickel and the screw and the marble that had refused the peony bed. He looked toward the stone without moving his face much, because a person does not want to give a field reason to brag. He said thank you into his jacket as if the cloth were a helper. He walked home. Winter did what it does. It scoured the county down to the essentials. It made the roads into suggestions and the kitchen into a chapel. It put the sound of the furnace into his bones and the number of snow shovels in the garage into a bigger argument than necessary. The whistling came once or twice in a blow that turned the mailbox into a hooded thing, and when it did, he stood at the window and let it be. The way you let a neighbor sing one verse of a song you only half like because he is your neighbor, and you hope the reverse is also true. When spring returned, hesitant and then reckless, he walked out to the stone once in daylight. He stood there like a person does when he's about to open a letter he has already read. He put his hand on the iron ring, and the ring chose not to move. He felt only cool metal and the idea of a door. He said the name of the boy he thought must have once practiced whistling there, not loud, not soft. He thanked the man with the Kessler tag for nothing and for everything. He went home and planted, because that is the part of the story a farm writes to remind itself the ending belongs to the ground and the beginning belongs to the same. If you ever hear 3 notes carry clean from a field at midnight, and you are the kind of person who can tell the difference between wind and a message, remember this. The first step into the rose is a promise. Don't make it if you intend to perform yourself for the dark. Bring only your boots, your breath, and your willingness to be the person who will go fetch, not the person who will tell about fetching. Don't shine your light straight into old places unless someone who belongs to them asks you to. Lay your hand flat on what needs closing. When a tune that has wandered too long finds its last note, let it. When a door that has been heavy learns again how to rest, do not hire that door for different work. There are states where cornfields wear their ghosts like belts. There are ditches whose water knows the names people set into it. There are stones that have been held down by weather and held up by stories. There are men who can whistle and men who cannot, and both kinds do well if they listen. And sometimes, in a county that owes as much to wind as to family, a man with a flashlight and an old dog asleep on the porch will follow a tune into the rose and come back, having left something that doesn't need his hands anymore. When he sits down again, the chair will squeak in the key the field prefers. The kitchen clock will softly argue with the refrigerator about seconds. The night will soften him on its slow wheel. The next day, someone will wave on County 18 without lifting a hand, and the answer will come back exactly right. And somewhere beyond the line where 2 quarters meet under a fence, a stone will find it easier to be a stone because 2 men lifted it once, together, and then set it down the way the land asked. Her phone pinged at a grave with her name. The notification bloomed on her screen the moment her shoes left the gravel and slid onto the soft path between moss-dark stones. A small bell chime, bright as glass. A banner at the top. You have arrived, Edeni Hale. The words sat there as calmly as a weather app, as if the city had decided to label her the way it labels a bridge or a square. The place was Bonaventure Cemetery in Savannah, Georgia. Spanish moss hung in long, steady sentences from the live oaks. The river kept its secrets behind the bluff and breathed like a sleeping room. It was late afternoon on a Sunday in early November, the air cool enough to make her wish for sleeves and warm enough to forgive her for forgetting them. Before we begin, tell me, where are you listening from and what time is it there? Her name was Edeni Hale, 28. She worked in visitor services at a small maritime museum upriver, the kind of job that made her memorize the angles of ships and the dates when storms came ashore. She liked fonts and quiet, and the sound salt makes drying on stone. She was visiting Bonaventure because her friend Anson had flown in from Minneapolis for a long weekend, and the 2 of them liked places that let you feel your breath in your mouth. The year was 2021. Phones knew where you were within decent intimacy. Some headstones wore small plaques with codes that asked to be scanned and promised a story. They had parked on Bonaventure Road under an oak that had learned to be older than most houses. The sky was simple, a clean coin of light. The volunteer at the office had given them a paper map and a soft-voiced list of locations worth the walk if you wanted your day to hold. Look for the little angels facing east. Find the section where the camellias keep blooming against instruction. There's a family plot that feels like a room you shouldn't step into without knocking. No one mentioned a notification. Edenai stared at her phone. The banner did not give a location like Section F or Plot 31. It was the same tag her calendar used when she arrived at work or home. You have arrived, Edenai Hale. As if she were a place. As if the grave were her. Anson leaned toward the screen and squinted. He was tall and light-footed, a teacher of high school literature who carried poems in his pockets like receipts. He read the banner and then her face and made a small arranging motion with his hands, the way he does when he wants to place humor where fright is trying to sit. That's a bug, he said, not unkindly. Or a geofence you made and forgot. Did you tell your phone to remind you to be yourself today? She clicked the banner to see where the phone thought she belonged. A map opened, a blue dot pulsed with the steady patience of a small heartbeat. A gray pin sat 100 feet east in a section labeled McAllister. The pop-up bubble above the pin read Ideny Hale in the same unsentimental font. She did not have a virtual contact called a cemetery. She had not created a reminder to arrive at her own name. The phone had decided the path curled between stones with dates that made you speak them out loud, because numbers are easier to hold when they come through the mouth. 1873, 1920. 2009. The Oaks leaned as if sold on the idea that the living need rehearsal space. Anson spoke a tour fact about a poet who loved this place and whose plaque visitors touch in a small, quick superstition. Idoni nodded because liking facts is a way of staying steady. Her pocket shook again. Another chime, the same banner. You have arrived. Ideny Hale. She breathed the way the yoga teacher on the internet tells you to. In through a count of 4, hold for 4, out for 6. They followed the path east until the bluff opened its shoulder and let the wind test their sleeves. The section ahead was a little higher, a little more sure of itself. A plot enclosed by low stone, dressed in ivy, sat beneath a live oak that looked like a table that had decided to grow legs. In the center stood a headstone gray as rain, taller than Idoni's shoulder. The name at the top held Ideny Hale. She stopped. You might have stopped too. Her name was not common. Her mother had found it in a book of Old English names and liked the way it sounded like a promise made under a tree. She had never met another Ideny. To see the letters in this order on stone felt like stepping into a movie where you have lines you did not audition for. Anson's hand found her elbow without a show of it. He had the sense not to say, wow, or are you kidding? He stood with her and let the river finish a sentence neither of them had started. The dates carved below the name were the first clean relief, 1974 to 2014, not hers. A woman 2 decades older, gone 7 years now. Under the dates, a line that read as Keeper of the Keys. The stone carried a small oval of glazed photo, a face with hair tucked back, eyes steady, a glint of a key ring at the edge of the frame. The oval was rubbed to a shine from fingers, the way love polishes small things while refusing to say it is love. On the right-hand corner of the stone, someone had bolted one of the new plaques with its little square of patterns. Scan to learn more. People who love story cannot resist a square that holds one. Ideny lifted her phone and let the camera see. A link opened without asking for anything. A page built by a memorial service company bloomed. At the top, the name again. Below, a small biography. A life lived with habits, upright and kind. A childhood in Chatham County, a long run as cemetery sexton. The last line read in a voice that felt like a woman sitting on a step with a mug and a warning and a grin. If you need something, tell the ground. It will tell me. While she read, the phone hummed again. Not a banner this time. A little circle pulsing at the top of the screen, the way maps announce a place with enthusiasm. The circle flashed once, then settled. Ideny swiped down to see the source, a calendar reminder with no category. White, titled simply, Arrived. Location, here. She had not written that. The phone, perhaps, had decided the day needed a label, or the small plaque had more to it than the page admitted. Anson said the woman in the photo had librarian eyes. He meant that as a compliment. He pointed at the key ring. He said his grandmother had been a keeper of the keys at a church in North Dakota, and those women know where every grief sits at every hour, the way a night janitor knows which chairs spit gum and which ones sigh. They stood a while. People walked past in respectful silence, guided by a docent's voice that held just enough theater to keep 15 people from wandering into their own daydreams. Spanish moss moved like thought repeating itself. A flake of light rose off the river and fell back as if it had changed its mind about being air. It would have been a good story already finding your own name on stone, a phone that had the audacity to tell you you had arrived, but something else decided to be true. A little tone sounded from the phone, the way sounds do when an app you forgot you had decides to help. It was the noise her airdrop made when someone nearby wanted to share a photo at inopportune moments. The screen shifted to a dialogue. A file offered to send itself to her. The sender name was a string of letters and numbers that meant nothing. The file name read Keys. Anson leaned in and made his face calm. Decline, he said gently, because strangers in public places with quick hands make tricks, and both of them work in museums and have seen every version of the human habit of testing boundaries. She hovered. Decline would be wise. Accept would be a dare. She pressed accept because sometimes you let stories finish what they start. The file downloaded. It was not a photo. It was an audio file, a minute 42 in length. The waveform showed it wasn't silence. She tilted the phone toward her own ear instead of speaker because you don't open a voice in a cemetery loud unless the voice has earned the right. Static first, then the sound of wind combing something thin, then a woman's voice, the age of a woman, who tells tools where they belong and expects cooperation. The voice said, dry as a towel and warm as a summer kitchen. If you are standing over me, child, and your name is mine, you can help me keep my promises. Put your phone on the stone and leave it be a minute. It will tell you where to stand next. Anson's eyebrows did a small jazz riff and then tried to behave. Okay, he said softly, a word that meant, I am here and I am not going to ruin this with cleverness. Ideni set the phone on the flat top of the headstone the way the voice had instructed. The screen slid into its lock. Her reflection replaced her. The oval photo looked past her shoulder the way old photos always do. She counted in her head as a way to keep the childish fear of being tricked from standing up and knocking the ritual with its elbow. 50, 60, 78. The phone buzzed once, she lifted it. The map opened of its own accord. The blue dot had moved nothing. The gray pin had changed. It labeled another grave 30 yards north with a name neither of them had seen on the paper map. Rosin Hale. A second name. Another Hale. The first name was Welsh and not common here. They went because the day had asked enough times to be answered polite. The second stone stood lower, more modest. The granite, a color you could never find on purpose if you looked in a catalog. The dates were older, 1931 to 1999. The epitaph read, She kept the gate lighted, and under that, in smaller letters, so faint you could only see them when the cloud put its hand over the sun, a line, Rosine was born. Rosine Idris. She married into Hale and stayed. Tell my niece if she comes through here that I see her when I count keys. I am not anybody's niece, Ideni said aloud, and then took a breath because she heard the defensiveness squirreled underneath. I mean, not hers. You might be more people's niece than you know, Anson said gently, a man who had grown up with uncles who weren't uncles and yet were more family than the kind that wears your face. They stood while the wind added a signature to the bottom of the page of the day. The river put its shoulder against the bank and leaned. The phone did not ping again for a while. A cardinal went from one branch to another with the purposeful speed of a person who knows where the parts are stored. A group of teenagers trailed an auntie through the lanes, popping gum in a respectful way, which is a regional miracle. Ideni looked up Rosin on the cemetery's database because when your heart gets odd, facts make a braid to hold on to. The database was one of those volunteer-built websites that carry the tone of a potluck where everyone brings a dish so exact it shames you for choosing salad. Rosen's entry was thorough. Born Rhonda Valley, came across with parents as a child, settled in Chatham County, married one Mr. Hale, worked checklist after checklist for the electrical union office, sang alto in church with the patience of an anvil, survived by no children, preceded by older brothers, all gone. Niece mentioned in an obituary in 1999 with no name given. Anson made a sound that meant the story had wiped its hands on his shirt and was ready to cook. The phone chimed once more, now with the tone her museum app uses when a beacon in an exhibit hands you a fact. She had turned beacons off last month because being interrupted by history while in history felt a bit like a stage whisper in a quiet theater. She had not turned beacons back on. The screen read, "A note is waiting." A map pinpointed the little brick building the cemetery uses as a workshop for the grounds crew. A path drew itself in blue between the Hales and the shop, like a string in a child's game. They went because keys that ask to be found deserve not to rust. The door to the shop was propped with a cinder block the way doors are propped everywhere when the weather learns to be useful. A radio played a station that chose old soul and occasional baseball score updates. No one was at the counter. A bell stood there anyway, the kind that rings a sound like a glass penny. Anson rang it because he likes participating in obvious rituals. A man in his 50s with a badge that read August came in from the back, wiping his hands on a rag that had earned its keep. "You folks need a map?" he asked, then took a longer look at their faces and revised. "Or a minute." "We were by the Hale Stones," Idony said, and watched the way a man looks when a rhyme finds his ear and tells him it cares. August nodded. "Course you were," he said. "I keep an envelope for that family. Been waiting on who it's waiting on." He reached under the counter, where drawers have learned to hold what should not be lost, and brought up a large yellow envelope with a blue paperclip that had rusted a little by choosing weather. The envelope had 3 words on the front in tidy block letters. For the next Idony, heat went across her face like an honest light. August saw it and stilled. He handed her the envelope the way people hand one another babies, meaning well and moving slow. She opened it with her thumb. Inside, 3 items. A small brass key, old, not ornate, with teeth filed like a decision. A folded sheet torn from a spiral notebook, edges soft with years. And a wallet-sized photo of a woman in a blue work shirt with a name patch and a grin you could feel on your back like afternoon Sunday. The patch read, "Idony." The face belonged to the woman on the first stone. The note was written in blue ballpoint in a hand that pressed harder than paper deserves. It read, simple. "For the next Idony in this county who can hear me the way a key hears a lock, my niece is out there. She won't say yes to the word niece because words are stubborn. She'll need to open the box in the old mausoleum we keep for tools and favors. The key is for the small door on the left. Lift on the latch while you turn. The box has what belongs to her and me and her grandmother. If she is standing at my stone with a phone, she will know that I know. Don't bring a crowd. Bring one friend who reads instructions with his eyes. Leave the key when you are done. We can count without hands here. I'm not someone's niece," she said again, and heard how the sentence grew less certain with practice. Her mother's family tree began and ended in a different state. A line of women who told polite lies to spare one another the sharp edges and did their grief in broom closets. Her father had not survived long enough to name distant relations. He had left behind a bent screwdriver and a smell that her body still could find when a day asked. Anson's hand found the counter in a quick pat, like checking for keys as you leave the house. "You don't have to be a niece to be the person meant to do a thing," he said. "But also you might, and it might not matter how that happened." August tapped the counter twice, a habit that sounded like a yes. "The small left door," he said. "People never see it. Take the path behind the office and go right at the angel with the missing hand. The mausoleum is the little brick one that looks polite. The left door sticks the way a lie sticks to a room. Do what the note said, lift and turn." They went back into the light. The blue string on the map did not bother now to draw. The path knew their feet. The angel with the missing hand stood where the volunteer had said, "Angels stand, face east," blank expression that suggested she had witnessed every century and found nothing quite bad enough to frown at yet. The brick mausoleum waited with that small pride buildings have when they know they are not the grandest on the block, but are the one that does the job without complaint. The left door looked like a panel added later. The brass latch had the smoothness that comes of being touched by people who mean to get work done. Idani slid the key in, the teeth caught, and then thought better of it. She lifted the latch with her other hand and turned. The lock gave. The door opened 6 inches and stopped, ticked by a wooden wedge that had been insinuated at the bottom by someone who had not wanted the door opened by accident or habit. Anson reached down and pulled the wedge free. It had a date burned into it with a soldering iron. 2014. The year on the first stone. Inside was a closet of sorts, pegboards and hooks, a rake missing its second tooth, a coil of twine that had memorized its circle and would not learn a new trick, and on a shelf at eye level, a tin bread box with a domed lid, painted a green faded to the color of river glass. No lock. Written in the same blue hand on a piece of tape was a word. Hail. She lifted the lid like a person lifts lids on boxes that might contain bees or inheritance. Inside, arranged with the blunt care of someone who never made a mess unless a branch fell where it shouldn't, sat 3 items. A narrow ledger with a black cloth spine, a key fob with 3 small brass tags stamped with numbers, and a folded paper bag, the kind grocery stores use for baking flour, rolled tight and rubber banded with an elasticity that made its own sound. She opened the ledger first because pages are her map. Names, rows of them, dates, locations in the cemetery with check marks where gates had failed and been repaired. Next to some entries, a small star. Those starred names also appeared on the little brass tags. Numbers, not random, not plot numbers, locker numbers. The cemetery kept a bank of lockers for the grounds crew in a shed she had not thought needed one. Her phone chimed in her pocket, a small suggestion from the maps. Direction nudged, left, then right. Then, would you like to add this location to favorites? She ignored the phone. The ledger asked for attention. On the inside back cover of the ledger, a note in different handwriting. Spare for Rosen's niece if she finds it. Locker 12 holds what isn't in the ground. If days are bad, tell the river. The river tells me. The tags on the key fob read 10, 12, 14. She ran her finger over 12 the way a person does over a scar. She felt nothing supernatural. She felt focus. Anson took the bag at her nod and unwound the rubber band. Inside lay 2 objects wrapped in butcher paper. He unrolled the first. A locket. Gold. Thin as luck. With a hairline crack. Shaped like lightning. If lightning were careful. Inside, a photograph so tiny it could be breathed away if you weren't paying mind. A baby in a christening gown that had borrowed lace from a curtain. The face pinched in the way newborn faces pinch. On the back, in pencil that had migrated into the paper like a crop planting itself, a name. Rosen Idris Hale. A line below it, for my niece to hold if she comes to hear me. He unrolled the second. A county map from 1968, creased, the paper's fiber gone feathery at the folds. A road circled in blue pencil, a margin note. That old step bridge out by the waterworks. We left something in the middle beam in 74. If you can't find it, it means we didn't need it. If you can, well, you'll know. We are not going to a step bridge at dusk, Anson said, a man who loved old maps and also loved not getting in the paper under the wrong kind of headline. We are going to find Locker 12 while the Museum of the Dead is still on our side. They found the shed. August had seen their faces through the glass and met them halfway with the keys because some stories ask for a witness who knows better than to narrate. He led them to a wall of small metal lockers, each door painted the dull red of a barn that had not given up but had learned to pace itself. He unlocked 12 and stepped back. Inside lay a small stack of shallow boxes, each labeled with a date. The top was the 1, 2014. Under that, 2008. Under that, 1999. Anson lifted the top box and set it on a workbench. He opened it with care. Inside, wrapped in tissue that had become more suggestion than paper, sat a handful of objects that people keep for reasons the living should not pretend to understand quickly. a church key. A photo of three women, arms crossed, outside a union hall, one of them with a name patch that read, "R. Hale," a Polaroid of a red step bridge with water under it purling toward a bend. A handwritten note folded small. The note read, "For the niece who knows the word niece because keys hum when they find their door. You were not an accident. We kept count. We named you all the ways we could. Our names were soft and stubborn. Take what you want, leave the ledger so the ground does not have to work alone." She sat because standing felt rude. She is a woman whose mother did not tell stories with this kind of curve. She gathered the truth like thread. Her mother had been born in this county and left when she was 19, a bus to another state, a man met in a grocery line, a child years later when the idea of staying had become heavy. She did not talk about siblings, claimed not to remember cousins, flinched when the phrase "back home" came up. The name Hale had come not from romance, but from accident or choice, a name taken because other names insisted on being something else. Rosen Idris had married into Hale, but the family had been built long before that. Keys had been passed with and without rings. August stood with a posture that says, "I will not take your moment away from you." When the radio in the shed shifted to a weather update, he reached and turned it down so the forecast would not interrupt a storm already occurring. Anson put his hand flat on the bench and counted to 8 for no reason his body would confess. "Tell me if you want me not to read the other notes," he said. The kind of friend a person needs in rooms where both mystery and bureaucracy show up at the same table. "Read," she said. "We're already here." The note in the 1999 box was from Rosen and felt like laughter on a porch when the pots are already washed. "The house we put ourselves in is not one the county believes holds blood," she wrote. "But it holds me. And it holds the keys. If you need a name, the river has one. If you need a door, the shed does." In the box from 2008, a different hand, shakier, it read, "I kept the lights in the gate, all through the storms. I think sometimes we are simply the people who keep lights. If you are mine, you will know when to turn one on." In the box from 2014 was a letter from the sexton whose face smiled off the oval on the stone. She wrote like a woman who had lived by the kind of lists that get family through winter. "I have no children of my own except the Gates," she wrote, "but I have a niece whether the paper says it or not. I kept her not by being in the room, but by owning my stubbornness. If she stands over me with a phone and hears me, she will take what she needs and leave what she should, and I will go on counting with my hands in dirt like I like to do." They left the boxes as they'd found them, shifted nothing but air. August closed the locker with a satisfaction that felt like lining up the edges on a stack of bills and smoothing them down. He did not ask for anyone's story. He had one of his own, built of this place, and the line of names he keeps with the quiet grace of a man who waters plants. By the time they stepped back into the paths, the light had hunched into evening. The river sounded less like sheet music and more like a phrase repeating. The map on her phone had stopped suggesting anything and gone back to pretending it was an obedient device. The air smelled like river, camellia, and a penny someone had worried in a good pocket for a decade. Anson asked if she wanted to go to the step bridge. She said no, in a voice that held both sorrow and a plan. Tomorrow, in daylight, when names sit on surfaces more politely. He agreed because this is what friendship is, a committee about timing. That night, she sat at her kitchen table with the ledger borrowed under August's nod and the locket under her thumb. She called her mother. The call rolled twice, and then the voice she knew and loved and sometimes resented filled the line with wind and caution. They made small talk for 30 seconds, and then they moved somewhere they had not walked together. "Ma," she said, "who was Rosen? Who was Idony before me?" Silence, sincere. A kettle somewhere in the house. The refrigerator willing itself to be steady. Finally, her mother sighed, and the sigh sounded like a drawer allowed to close after being held open too many years. "My aunt," she said, "not by blood, by the kind of line people draw when the law does not help. She and the other one, the sexton, kept me safe when I was little and didn't know that my father wasn't safe to be around. They ran the lights in the cemetery and in the loose latch doors and told me when to lock things and when to open them. They were more my aunts than any of the few relatives that share me. When I left everything. I thought that was how you survive. I have not told you the parts you asked me about because I thought you'd want something tidier than I had, and because I am silly enough to think if I did not say the names, the ache would go to sleep. She told a story of a girl who sat on a stoop counting keys while two women kept a town's small doors in working order, literal and figurative. She told how those women had taught her to move through rooms with respect and to leave envelopes where they'd be needed. She did not speak tenderly about the man who invented the silence she had carried. She spoke tenderly about the other men, the ones who changed locks without asking why, and taught a child where the ladders were kept for days when rain insisted. I should have told you, her mother said finally, soft with the fatigue of a woman who has not confessed a simple truth for a long time. You have two names, the one I gave you and the one the other women left for you to find when you were ready. You belong to both. You belong to yourself most. They went to the step bridge the next day. It was out by the old waterworks, just as the margin note had said. The county had let weeds try to become the principal of the place, and the weeds had accepted the assignment with poor posture and pride. The bridge stood, red paint scabbed into beauty, water under it moving with the impatient streams have when the river bullies them with schedule. In the middle beam, behind a square of metal the size of a book, a hollowed space. Inside, wrapped in waxed paper, a ring of keys on a chain that had learned 3 hands. Each key had a number, 10, 12, 14. The fob matched the tags in the box. Beside the keys lay a square of paper with a tiny handprint in paint the color of that old camellia behind the office. A child had been here once. She had pressed her hand down. Someone had saved it for a woman who would put her hand down later and understand they did not take the keys. She set her palm over the handprint. The sizes did not match. The feeling did. She closed the plate. She and Anson walked back to the car with the sun finding their shoulders and the hum of insects writing their own accurate dissertations on persistence. Back at the cemetery, she returned the ledger. August nodded like a man at the end of a good piece of work. She walked to the first stone and put 2 fingers on the glazed oval where the sexton's face had learned to look past tourists to the river. She did not speak. She let the ground and the river carry whatever needed moving. Her phone did not ping again there. It would ping months later, once in a grocery store aisle in a different city, when an older woman in a union jacket looked at her and tilted her head in a way that meant keys are a language. It would ping once again when she held the hand of a friend through a night much too long and heard as clearly as weather a voice say, "Lift and turn." It would ping at odd hours for the next several years when doors asked to be locked or opened with care. Sometimes it would be an app acting like a person. Sometimes it would be a person acting like a map. Sometimes it would be a name arriving in a room with good manners and old roots. If you want the tidy ending, it is this. She wrote to the memorial company to ask who had access to the airdrop at the stone. No one answered in a way that satisfied anyone who cares about permissions. She kept the photo of the sexton in her wallet behind the museum badge and found that having a face like that near your ID keeps you from forgetting where the door to the stairwell is in a fire. She learned to count gates with her hands, the way women in that county had since the first lock learned the first habit. She took pies to August's workbench and listened to his stories. She phoned her mother on Sundays and let the conversation go long enough to find the sentence that mattered each week. She carried with her the sentence from the oval's page. If you need something, tell the ground. It will tell me. If you want the less tidy truth, it is this. Sometimes your life is a geofence you didn't set. Sometimes you arrive at your own name carved in stone, and the stone says, "Welcome." Sometimes you are the niece of women who bent keys into new jobs and called that bending prayer. Sometimes your phone pings at a grave, and the ping is only a device doing what it was taught, and sometimes it is a noise a river makes when it is trying to talk through everyone's machines at once. If this happens to you, if you walk under trees that have learned the art of holding up clouds, and a little bell sounds in your pocket, and your name appears as a place, don't panic. Stand where you are. Read the dates out loud so the year will stop pretending it is only a number. Touch the stone with 2 fingers, not more. Listen for the voice that sounds like someone who knows where the ladders are kept. If a key is offered, lift and turn. If a door sticks, lift and turn. If a person asks for a niece, say the word niece like a new tool you know how to use. And when you leave, take the long path that wanders near the bluff. The river will be there keeping count. The oaks will be there practicing their patient grammar. Your phone will settle back into behaving. The ground will remember you, not because you are special, but because that is what ground does for people who treat it like a partner. Somewhere behind you, a bell on a worker's desk will ring, and a man named August will nod to no one and say out loud into an empty shed, "She arrived." Then he will sweep the floor in slow, exact strokes, as if he were writing the names in dust and erasing them on purpose so the day could begin again and mean it.